Infidelity. It's a topic we usually frame as just a simple moral failing, right? Someone did a bad thing. But what if it's more complex? A lot more complex. What if there's a story here written in our biology, our psychology, and yeah, even the laws of physics? Today, we're going to pull back that curtain. We're going to explore the science and the philosophy behind why affairs happen. And we're starting with the biggest question of all.
So it really all boils down to this one fundamental question. Why is it that despite our best intentions, our commitments, our love, why does that pull towards someone new sometimes feel so incredibly powerful? The answer, well, it's not simple. And to find it, we've got to take a journey deep inside the human brain.
Okay, so our first stop, biology. Because, before any conscious thought, before any of the emotional drama, there's this incredibly powerful chemical cocktail at work inside our heads. And look, this isn't about making excuses for anyone, not at all. It's about understanding the very real and very potent forces that we are all dealing with.
So think of it like this. Our brains can literally create an internal recipe for an affair. First up, you've got dopamine, the classic reward chemical. It goes through the roof with the thrill of novelty and secrecy, creating what's basically an addiction loop. Then there's oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone. When that fires up with someone new, it can create this super fast, often really confusing attachment. Then you throw in testosterone, which doesn't just fuel sex drive, it also fuels risk-taking. And finally, there's this thing called PEA. Just think of it as the infatuation or honeymoon chemical. It naturally fades in long-term relationships, which can create this biological push to go find a new source of that original high.
So why does this whole chemical system even exist in the first place? Well, it seems to be a relic of our evolutionary past. What you're seeing here is something called the dual mating strategy that scientists think we've inherited. For males, from a purely genetic point of view, the best strategy was to, spread their genes as widely as possible. But for females, the reproductive cost is way higher, right? So the strategy was kind of twofold. Secure a stable partner, a provider, but also, maybe, keep an eye out for better genetic options. So here's the crucial part. We have these conflicting circuits hardwired into us. One circuit is for long-term bonding, and another is for seeking out multiple partners. And in our modern world, those ancient circuits can cause a ton of friction.
Okay, so let's just sum up the biology here. We have this recipe, really, that makes us vulnerable. You've got a brain that's hardwired to get hooked on the dopamine rush of something new. You have hormones that can totally prioritize a new attraction over a long-term bond. You've got those ancient conflicting evolutionary drives we just talked about. And get this, research even points to specific genetic predispositions, like a variation of the DRD4 gene, which some people call the thrill-seeking gene. It can actually make some people more inclined toward risk-taking and infidelity. Put it all together, and it's a really powerful combination.
But of course, our biology isn't the whole story. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. It responds to our environment and especially to our emotional state. And this is where psychology comes into play. See, an affair is often less about the magnetic pull of someone new and way more about the push from a deficit, a hole within a person or inside their relationship.
In fact, a lot of research, looking at hundreds of people who've actually had affairs, has managed to boil down the main psychological drivers to just 8. 8 key motives. And what's so fascinating is how few of them are really just about sex.
And here they are. The list includes things like anger or revenge, trying to get back at a partner. But then you have these huge ones, feeling a lack of love or just straight up neglect, needing that attention and validation you're not getting at home. It also covers things like low commitment, not really seeing a future together, or a need to boost your own self-esteem, right? To feel desirable again. And then, of course, you have the desire for variety, or just plain old unmet sexual needs. But just look at that list. Notice how many of them are rooted in a deep emotional or relational deficit? They're really about trying to fill a void. And that last one, situation, that's kind of the "it just happened" scenario, usually driven by opportunity and, interestingly, often leads to the most regret.
And interestingly, on average, these motives can play out a little differently between men and women. Men tend to score higher on motives like seeking variety and pure sexual desire, which, links right back to those evolutionary drives we talked about earlier. Women, on the other hand, more often report motives that are rooted in those emotional deficits, like feeling a lack of love or feeling completely neglected and invisible in their relationship. But some motives, like anger or low commitment, those are pretty much equal across the board.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this psychology, it's this. While an affair almost always involves sex, it is rarely just a search for sex. More often than not, it's a desperate search for a feeling. The feeling of being seen, of being desired, of being understood, or maybe just feeling alive again. It's a symptom of a much deeper issue.
Okay, but there's one more layer to this whole thing. And for this one, we have to zoom out, way, way out, beyond our brains, beyond our feelings, all the way out to the fundamental laws of the universe. This is about the long game. This is about the unforgiving mathematics of time and consequences.
And the key concept here is something called entropy. Now, in physics, it's the second law of thermodynamics. It's basically the idea that everything in the universe, everything, naturally moves from order to disorder. A hot cup of coffee always cools down. A building, if you just leave it alone, will eventually crumble. And you know what? So do relationships. They require a constant, conscious input of energy, things like communication, care, effort, to fight back against this natural tendency toward decay.
And that very same law of entropy, it applies to our own bodies. This is the stark, undeniable truth that so often gets completely lost in the heat of a short-term chemical rush. We all get older. Our vitality is finite. And that's not philosophy. That is just hard science.
And this timeline really shows the profound implication of that one single fact. Look, in our 30s, 40s, maybe into our 50s, when our hormones and our energy are high, that dopamine rush feels incredible, and the long-term cost, it feels abstract, like something that happens to other people. But then comes the shift in our 50s and 60s as hormones decline and energy starts to wane. The consequences of choices made years ago start to actually show up. And then, by our 70s and beyond, the whole game changes completely. What we need most then isn't some fleeting thrill. It's that support structure, the family, the trust, the shared history that might have been badly damaged years before. This is the final accounting, where the true price of a short-term choice can become painfully crystal clear.
So, is that it? Are we just slaves to our chemistry and the unyielding march of time? Is it all just hopeless? No, not at all. And that brings us to the final and honestly the most important part of this whole story, the power of conscious choice.
This right here might be the single most important takeaway of all. Biology is not destiny. Yes, our biology gives us impulses, and sure, our psychology can give us motives, but neither of them gets to write our destiny. We are not just a bundle of chemicals and evolutionary leftovers.
And the reason why is because of the most recently evolved part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. You can think of this as the CEO of your brain. It's the part that can look at the primal brain's impulses and say, nope, not right now. It's like our own internal time machine, allowing us to simulate the future and actually weigh the long-term consequences of what we do today. It is what allows us to live by a set of values, not just a set of urges. And maybe most importantly, it's what enables us to feel empathy, to genuinely consider how our choices are going to impact the people we care about.
So at the end of the day, we land on this question. Your biology gives you the impulse. Your past, your history can give you the motive. But in that tiny space between the impulse and the action, that's where our greatest human capacity lives. It's the power to use our conscious mind, to look ahead, and to make a choice. And what that choice will be, well, that's ultimately up to you.